Welcome to Enchanted Astrology Podcast with Ariel Smith. Today we will be discussing the Sagittarius new moon that will be exact on December 19th at 6:40 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So today I want to do something a little different. Instead of starting with the new moon itself, I want to begin with the journey that brought us here, because new moons don't arrive in a vacuum. They are born out of what we've already been processing, feeling, releasing ultimately with the waning cycle and coming into a new understanding from. So since the full moon in Gemini, the moon has been moving through this waning phase, which is a time of emotional digestion, integration, and ultimately letting go. So today I want to tell the story of her journey. And as I do, I invite you to notice where this mirrors your own emotional landscape over the past couple of weeks. So let's begin. After the full moon in Gemini, the moon moved into Cancer, where she formed a conjunction with Jupiter retrograde. And this is where the journey begins with something very simple but very radical, because she began to rediscover what joy actually feels like. And this isn't any type of a conditioned joy. It's not performance based. It's not tied to money or productivity or approval, what everybody else is doing. This is a very private and personal joy. It's the kind of joy that we knew when we were children, because many of us grow up being told, whether explicitly or implicitly, that joy comes after responsibility. Do all the things first, meet all the expectations, be practical, and if there's time left over, then you can enjoy yourself. But in today's modern world, there often is no time left over. So over time, we lose touch with our joy, not because it doesn't bring us joy anymore, or we don't want to do those things, but just because we've been conditioned to treat it as something optional. And Jupiter retrograde in Cancer invites the moon to look backwards, to remember what it felt like, what is your true joy, what actually lights you up, what feels nourishing and safe and so expansive without needing anyone's approval. You don't need to justify it. It just is. I know for me, something as simple as scavenger hunts can bring me so much joy. Searching for clues, having to go find something. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone else. It's just a state of joy, and that's the point. So at the same time, the moon is also forming a trine to Mercury in Scorpio. So while joy is being remembered, information is also coming in, and we begin to see the stories and fears that have kept us from moving toward our joy. The narratives that tell us it's irresponsible, it's unrealistic, or even selfish to focus on and follow your joy. And when we bring these stories into the light, which is what Scorpio energy does, it brings it into the light, we see them clearly and they don't actually hold. And the moon is also trining Neptune in Pisces, which helps her to see all of this from a higher perspective. Because Neptune dissolves the illusion. It softens the shame. It reminds us that many of the reasons we believe we can't live from joy were never true to begin with. And this creates a beautifully supportive water grand trine, helping us release the heavy emotional stories we've been carrying. Shame begins to start loosening its grip. We stop believing in these stories to the extent that we have been believing in them. But there's also an inconjunction to Mars in Sagittarius here, because as our beliefs change, so does the direction of our energy. We begin to notice where our actions have been misaligned with our heart's truth, where we've been pushing forward in ways that don't actually feel true. They don't feel authentic. They feel very forced. So there's a recalibration happening here, a growth point. There's an awareness of how it feels to go against our own will, and a quiet realization that we don't want to do that anymore. That does not feel good. It ultimately doesn't serve us. It can be quite chaotic, actually. So from there, the moon moves into Leo, and something shifts. Something shifts here, because it's no longer just about remembering your joy. It's about you claiming the right to it, claiming the right to your joy. In Leo, the moon becomes aware of her authenticity, her unique frequency, and her right to take up space exactly as she is. So this joy here does not need any type of consensus or permission, and it just doesn't need to make sense to anyone. It's very self-sourced and authentic, and there's a growing confidence here, a knowing that authenticity is actually the way out of all of these daily dilemmas. That when we align with what feels true, things begin to move a lot more smoothly. And the moon forms a trine to Venus in Sagittarius. And this is where her magnetism comes online. Because when we stop spending our energy on doubt, on shame, on this self-blame, we actually become powerful attractors. We draw in experiences and people that resonate with who we truly are. And we realize that people don't connect to us despite our authenticity. They actually connect to us because of our authenticity. So there's also, however, some inconjunctions at this time to Mars in Sagittarius, as well as Saturn in Pisces. And these tell us that moving forward from this new place requires a change. What we invest our energy in, the structures we commit to, what we believe success even looks like, what we've been taught is honorable or even prestigious, all of that begins to look different through this new lens. So we've been taught that achieving what we want requires more effort, more pushing, more discipline, but actually it just requires less resistance. So doubt and shame act like static in the signal. They block what we're trying to call in. And when we remove these blocks, results can come actually quite quickly, sometimes, even instantaneously. And as the moon continues in her journey, in this waning cycle, she forms a trine to Chiron retrograde in Aries. And here, the depth of our separation wound from self becomes clear. The wound of abandoning ourselves, not remembering our true selves, betraying our truth in order to fit the narrative that we have been taught to accept. But there's healing here, and it actually comes through just giving yourself permission to be authentic and permission to follow your heart instead of the narrative that assigns blame and guilt and shame if you don't follow it. So there's a sense here that this following of that narrative at the expense of your authentic self is no longer an option. Denying that truth is no longer acceptable, and this healing makes your being in your own authenticity non-negotiable. So then the moon enters quite a pivotal moment of this journey, because she forms a fixed T-square with Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, as well as Uranus retrograde in Taurus. And these are at the late degrees of the signs. So they're the end of the road degrees where the status quo is breaking down. And here, fear is revealed for what it truly is, which is a self-imposed prison. We begin to see how much of our reality has been shaped by permission seeking, this outsourcing of our authority and believing that we need something outside of ourselves to validate what we already know. And I keep going on about this Taurus Scorpio axis because it's a very prominent theme lately, where the extent that we're separated from ourselves and we don't remember our own innate abilities, we don't remember ourselves as divine, infinite beings. We seek permission in the outside world to access these abilities. And our outside world, we seek it externally. So our outside world becomes very cluttered. And what it does for us ultimately is it gives us permission, and it directs us back inside to remember those qualities within us. Remember that we never needed them externally. We just forgot we had them. So one example is like divination tools, divination cards. They are such a beautiful tool, and they can help us get comfortable listening inward. But often we start by relying on the external interpretation, right? Because we don't yet trust our own interpretation. But over time, as we grow more and more familiar with our intuition, we realize that we don't actually need the permission. We don't actually need the external object to access what is inside of us. It's always been inside of us. And this applies to so much more than just divination. as fear is integrated rather than projected or avoided, the systems that rely on fear to function start to dissolve because we stop buying into them. So the moon in Leo realizes something here that she can't unsee. She is a divine being. She is not this small, insignificant, powerless person that she's been led to believe. And this is where Aquarius helps with the answer to this T-square, because Aquarius, being the polarity of Leo, knows that there is room for everyone's authenticity. And in fact, that's exactly what's required, is for everyone to be their authentic self, to form that beautiful net, that web where everything functions synchronistically and everything functions in perfect divine timing. It's cohesive because everyone is giving themselves permission to be in their own authentic self. So next, the moon moves to 13 degrees of Virgo, where she's conjunct the south node and opposing that north node in Pisces. And here there's deep emotional patterns are brought into awareness. And these are our beliefs that are rooted in that survival consciousness, in overwork, overproductivity, hypercriticism. It's the idea that we must manage and control life in order to be safe. And these coping mechanisms are ancient. They're deeply rooted, but moving towards the North Node in Pisces feels quite uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable to trust and uncomfortable to let go and surrender, and just simply have faith, because we're so deeply taught and have been operating so strongly in this mindset that we need to control the outcome. And the gift here is a higher emotional wisdom. It's compassion for ourselves and our experiences, but also for others. And then the moon forms a kite with Jupiter retrograde in Cancer, Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, and Neptune in Pisces. So we have this water grand trine, and the moon moving into this kite formation opposite of Neptune in Pisces. And this brings a profound shift in perception. It's like if you put together a puzzle and you finally have that missing piece that suddenly makes the entire picture make sense. It's now a totally different picture than you thought it was, and it has completely shifted your perception of the image. And the moon in Virgo becomes the anchor for this new awareness. And there's healing that follows, because all healing is actually done through a shift in perception. And this is why Virgo is the healer, because Virgo governs our perceptions. And with Virgo being the Virgin, having a pure perception creates healing. And as the moon moves into Libra, this healing carries into relationships. So first, she forms a trine to Pluto in Aquarius, and there's a lightness here. It feels like a release from those dense, heavy emotional patterns like resentment, blame, guilt, or projection, because they simply just aren't supported anymore. And then she opposes Chiron in Aries, and she's asking us to notice how judgment of the other reinforces that separation wound from self. Right? But when we move away from judgment, away from blame, we are actually healing ourselves in that process. We're healing that original separation wound. And at the same time, the moon squares Jupiter retrograde in Cancer, which is requiring a growth here. It's requiring that we let go of these old emotional stories that we carry around with us, that we catch ourselves before we enter narratives where we're creating sides like this person versus that person. And we're choosing expansion instead over this emotional contraction. So responding differently can change everything. And then this is where we arrive at the new moon in Sagittarius. She's bringing this wisdom and this unlearning of these past patterns back to integrate it with the sun, with our conscious mind in Sagittarius, to mark a fresh new beginning that is focused on growth, on a higher truth, and an expansion of yourself and your horizons. So what is possible now from this expanded belief system, this expanded view? And this new moon is forming a square to Neptune in Pisces, which at first glance might sound, destabilizing somehow, but when we take it in the context of the moon's journey that we've just walked through, I see this actually as a test of integration. So throughout this waning cycle, we've been dissolving illusions. We understand that shame is what told us joy was irresponsible. That fear is what taught us that we were small, powerless beings that should be afraid. And with this perception shift, Neptune asks us here, do you truly trust what you've realized? Or do you want to drift back into what feels familiar? So can you live this truth? Can you embody it? Or do you keep it outside of yourself as an ideal without fully integrating and trusting in what you now know and see? So earlier in this waning cycle, Neptune has helped to dissolve these false narratives, and now here she's asking us to move forward without them. She's asking for faith. And at the same time, this new moon forms an in conjunction to Uranus retrograde in Taurus, which tells us that this new belief we're stepping into doesn't yet fit the material world that we're living in. And that's okay. Uranus retrograde in Taurus has been working to destabilize our sense of security, our sense of value, stability, what we rely on to feel safe, that nice Taurian comfort zone. And this in conjunction doesn't give us a clear solution. It requires that we experiment with that. And this is the same recalibration theme that we've seen throughout this waning cycle, where our joy, our relationship to our joy has shifted. Our authenticity has deepened, but our structures haven't fully caught up yet. So this new moon here is not asking that we take some sort of immediate action. It's just asking us to remain flexible, to consider what needs to change in how I relate to security so that my freedom doesn't feel threatening. And it doesn't necessarily mean everything all at once needs to change or burn down. It's taking small conscious adjustments that start to align your external world with this new internal truth and this deeper sense of knowing. So this new moon is testing our ability to live from what we now know, rather than from our comfort zone that we're used to. So as we arrive at this new moon in Sagittarius, we're not being asked to have everything figured out. We're being asked to move forward by building on this higher perception with more joy, more authenticity, and less fear. So this is a moment to stop acting from a place of restriction and to allow faith to guide us instead. We're not here to control the outcome or even to map out every step. We're being invited to trust that as we embody this new truth, our external world will begin to rearrange itself in response. So before I close, I want to briefly share that as a certified yin yoga instructor, I do have a number of yin yoga classes available online through my website. Yin yoga can be such a beautiful practice for releasing some of these narratives and emotions and stories that are often held deep within the body's tissues. And all of these classes are astrology themed and designed to support this kind of inner work. So you can find them at enchantedAstrology.ca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate every one of you who takes the time to listen, and I'll be back next week with another episode.